ask you a question. Unconscious bias in economic development. As economic development professionals, we're very good at creating inclusive economic growth, inclusive of the poor, inclusive of the persons with disability, inclusive of youth, and inclusive of women. That is what we're paid to do, and that's what we do. But it appears that in the profession itself, inclusiveness is a bit of a problem. And the reason for this is usually unconscious bias. This is what I'm discussing with two fantastic guests today. Welcome. Hello, welcome to Dev TV. As you all know, we profile ideas, innovations, and individuals doing amazing things in economic development. Today's topic is a special one, or today's broadcast is a special one, because I have two fantastic guests here to discuss a very serious issue with me. And my hope is that you will get involved in this conversation and contribute so we can share ideas and share experiences to move our sector forward. We're focusing today on development as a sector. We're focusing on the inclusiveness that appears to be lacking or perhaps weak in development. So this particular broadcast was inspired by an open letter that was sent by one of my guests. She will tell us about it in a few minutes, but this is such an important topic, and especially because of the recent election in the United States and how United States appears to be pushing in terms of inclusiveness. So we ought to try and do the same in economic development. So my first guest then is an inclusion warrior. She has worked in very senior positions across Africa, Asia, and now she's in Balkans. She's a team leader of a youth employment project in the Balkans. Her name is Clara, and please welcome Clara. Hi, Clara.
Hi, Alhavi. Thank you so much for having us on the channel.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you. It's an honor to have you here. My second guest then, is an economist by training. She's had amazing experiences across development sector. She works with the implementing companies, and she effectively set agendas for what people like me do. Please join me and welcome Nok. Hello.
Hi, Habib. Hello, Clara.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks for having us on the channel.
No, thank you. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. So this topic then, what I thought we should start with is, okay, what is the nature of inclusiveness in economic development as a profession? And how is it that you can have unconscious bias? I struggle with that phrase, unconscious bias. Can bias be unconscious, or is it just we're trying to spin a deliberate bias? What do you think, Clara?
That is a very important question, because it makes us reflect about what our biases, conscious or unconscious, may be, and if we try to be better people and better professionals, what we can do to unravel them and address them. So I think, as you said in the introduction, the question is timely, not only in our industry, where it is particularly important because of the nature of the work we do, but across the globe. So what are the unconscious biases that we all have to identify within ourselves and try to address? So yeah, great question. I don't know.
Nok, what do you think?
So I think if we look around ourselves and in the kind of projects we worked in or we know of, I think a lot of the projects are seen to be led by male team leaders, and then the number of sort of female team leaders in these positions is quite small. Similarly, in most of the knowledge products, you know, big reports, important reports, for example, are written by men, or you know, they are promoted as by men. We have also seen on many occasions, for example, you know, in speakers for seminars, or things like that, there's a larger number of male speakers rather than sort of female colleagues being invited to also speak or provide inputs in these events. So so that also, you know, that is at the kind of, that's what a lot of us see in the daily life. So in terms of like through our work, we know that there are a lot of qualified female practitioners as well as male practitioner, but for some reason, in reality, not a lot of people are seen publicly, either in leadership position or as speakers or as authors. And you know, the reason we are here today is to discuss, you know, whether these issues are part of the design of these projects or organizations, or are they part of the behavior, you know, or as in are people actually unconsciously uninviting or not giving women a seat at the table?
You see, that's the interesting bit for me, the unconscious bit. Do you, do you, okay, how can it be unconscious if you have a panel of 4 or 5 professionals, and you, in the course of your work, would have come across a lot of adequately qualified and people that are competent enough to speak of whatever it is that you're putting up in a seminar? How is it that that is unconscious? You spoke about dominated by men. So how is it that men just naturally, unconsciously assume that it's okay to just have men and not women on a panel or in a senior position, or how is that unconscious? That's the bit I'm struggling with.
If I may, just like a first thought about that is that really, truly, some people just don't see it. And it's crazy and it's strange, but it is true. And that's why I don't think blaming or naming and shaming is necessarily always the best strategy. So the first step needs to be to kind of educate, raise awareness, identify instances where this is happening, and just hope that the people who are perpetuating these practices at one point realize, because I want to believe that people are not mean by nature, realize that they themselves play a role in the possibilities of change. So beyond the fact that it is hard when you've been raised in a spirit of white male privilege to see that you may need to make room and be aware that there is other people who are also qualified to participate in different events. So despite the fact that people are very conditioned and raised like that, there is room, I think, to just signal it and fight until the default is just that people don't just go with their default solution, but just think twice before organizing, for example, a webinar where all speakers are male.
No, what do you think? Do you agree with that? Do you think it's mostly unconscious and people just don't think about these things, and perhaps they're too wrapped up in what the subject matter is and whatever it is that they're doing, so they forget to think about all of these other sort of like inclusive type approaches to things?
Yes, I think that all of us have some degree of unconscious bias, and we potentially think, you know, exhibit them in different ways. So I think the key thing here is potentially to be aware that we all have those biases and work to reduce, you know, or change the behavior wherever that leads to these things. So we could kind of provide, perhaps if it's helpful, to provide some example of, if we think about the cycle of a person into a project or into an organization, from the kind of attraction stage to the recruitment stage to the learning and development stage to the promotion progression stage, for example, at all those stages, people experience unconscious bias, and therefore we could then sort of go into a little bit more details in terms of how women are unconsciously biased against in those particular stages. So, you know, we could kind of, if that's all right, we can kind of, you know, spend a few more minutes talking about these different aspects.
Yes, please. Yes, please. It'd be nice.
Yeah. So maybe building on what Nog said, I would like to start with like the very first reason why most of us get into development. And the answer is not to stay in an office in other countries pushing papers. So usually when one decides to get into development, it's because they're after a certain interest in making an impact, in learning from implementing projects that have a purpose, learning from doing work in countries that face different challenges. So really, the main attraction of this industry to a young person is fieldwork at the end of the day. And obviously there will be exceptions, but and most of what I think I'm going to say 8 years of experience in development. Mostly people get into it because of the opportunities that fieldwork presents. Now, this applies obviously both to men and women. And then you start, and when you start as a junior person in an organization, you realize that it's a sector that generally tends to attract more women than men. So between that initial attraction and then the fact that you look at senior field job specs, and most of them are manned by men, something must happen in between. You know? And I think that it starts with the attraction of people into the field. So I recently read a study that I really recommend everyone to read. It's by Holly Kruger and a team of people from the Canopy Lab. And it's very interesting because they went through over 60 job specs from USAID programs over the past 2 years. And what they found is that these job specs for senior positions in the field all emphasize technical experience requirements over other types of experience that could be much more inclusive of women candidates. So if instead of requiring 10 years of technical experience in a very technical field, a job spec favors things like ease of adapting to change, curiosity, communication, listening, then those profiles of people mainly managing market systems programs may start to change. So that would be one thing where we see that there is a bit of a difference in the recruitment stage, the attraction stage.
Yeah. And then so yeah, like if you move on at the recruitment stage, you can also see that, you know, unconscious bias at play from kind of the composition of interview panels, for example, for a job in a project or an organization, tend to be more composed of more male than female. And this is perhaps that there tend to be more men in senior positions in an organization, either that be a project or again a company. So that automatically, you know, exclude some people already or intimidate certain people when they have to come to the interview. The other thing, you know, I think I mean, as I said earlier, I think unconscious bias sort of happens. We all have it, and for a lot of us, it happens within the first few seconds of the interview. A lot of people refer to this as kind of first impression. People are sometimes nervous, but people almost make up their mind within the first few seconds of that, whether or not they think this person is suitable for the position. Working in development, we also see, for example, that lots of international colleagues will likely be disadvantaged for not speaking it as a first language. So there's always a confidence level aspect there. The third thing I kind of think I wanted to touch on briefly, we've seen, you know, through our kind of recruitment for project staff and so on, anecdotally, when two equally qualified candidates are considered, the women always tend to ask for less, or her salary expectation is lower. Now, this could be different because of different things. Could be that, you know, they have had less experience, have had fewer opportunities, therefore think that, you know, they are less qualified or deserve less money, or sometimes it's just the general expectation from the panel that makes them feel that way. So, you know, moving on to kind of once the person gets, say, let's assume the person gets admitted to the project or to the company, joins them, then for sort of more junior staff, a lot of the it's usually the case that business development team are staffed by women at the entry level as a way to get these young people a foot into the industry. And then the kind of technical team or the project management team are staffed by men. So, you know, how do people get out of this kind of this circle? How do women? How, you know, it's important, I think, for employers or projects to build up the capacity of the younger people and give them equal chances to build their capacity and experience and CV to kind of help them progress and move into the areas they want to work in. So either into technical work, to project management as well. The kind of certain women are, I mean, on the other side, women sometimes are reluctant to ask for opportunities to learn because the companies or the organization don't necessarily promote the culture of gender equality here. So then, therefore, if they know that they don't necessarily want to come forward to ask for these opportunities.
Here, actually, I just want to have illustrate maybe with a couple of personal experiences that I've had to come across and that I'm sure are not foreign to women who listen to this broadcast. So, for example, it's happened to me that one of the companies I worked for, we were having a brainstorming session, and one of my very senior male colleagues turned to me and said, "Oh, you're not just a pretty face," when I came forward with an idea, you know? And beyond the fact that that is very inappropriate, it's also very, it's a really bad way of undermining one's confidence, because it shows you how people see you in the company, right? So yeah, I'm not just here to look pretty, I'm actually here to learn and contribute. And obviously, beyond the fact that most companies do have policies around sexual harassment, which of course is a huge matter in and of itself, we should start at home, and the contractor should start by making that kind of behavior unacceptable and not just something to be kind of laughed at and dismissed. You want to build the confidence of your staff. You wouldn't say that to a young man, don't say it to a young woman, because then that means that this person is probably going to feel less comfortable asking for support to progress. So just building on what Nok was saying, I think it's very important.
Can I just take us back 1 second? to the recruitment. So, if the genesis of all of this is in the recruitment and the job specs and the way the implementing company recruit, where does that come from? Is that from the donor pressure, or is just the culture of the implementing company? Where is this from?
So, I mean, it's probably, we can't really just say it's going to be somebody else, like, somebody else's fault. I think we've got to acknowledge that it comes from all different levels, and perhaps it's kind of helpful to maybe think about in 3 different sort of type of stakeholders. So, at the donor or client level, and then it's a kind of company / organization / project level, and then also at the individual level. So, I'm going to say first, for example, and this at the donor level, this is more peculiar, I suppose, to our development sector than others, that we often work for donors and clients who have their own recruitment requirements. So the terms of reference are written in a way that suggests that program resourcing has to have these certain profiles, and a lot of the way they are written, as Clara said before, in terms of the job specs, are written to suggest that this got to be the position has got to be occupied by a male colleague with lots of years of experience, with lots of experience managing this and that, and it's written in a way that either discourage people from applying, or women from applying, or B, they will not be selected. So it's so that's at the donor level, and that is something we need to sort of ask, how do we deal with that? How do we kind of deal with that? To what extent can we, as contractors or as projects, educate the donors or the client a little bit more about the need to change these program requirements? Is one. But then also at the, they're not all to blame, because at the project or company level, I think it's important for companies to ensure that the HR decisions promote equal opportunities for both men and women, and it's the same way that things are written.
I asked that question to link back to what Clara was just describing in terms of her experience within that meeting. And I just can't help but think that, well, I mean, I was thinking maybe this is a culture of the company, and that's why this basically evolved into her experience. And the emboldenedness of that sort of comment, I was thinking maybe it was inspired by some of the decisions that were made before the company began to implement a project like that. What do you think, Clara?
I think, Habib, that I mean, we all know how the industry works, and here I'm talking about an industry because at the end of the day, it's about making money, whether the implementing companies are for or non-for-profit. You do need to make a margin on the positions of people that you send to the field. That's where most of the income for our companies comes from. In order to be able to send people to the field and make a margin on them, they need to have a certain degree of experience. Otherwise, the client won't accept them, linked back to reasons that Nog just mentioned. Now, when do you start building your staff capacity? It starts from the moment that you recruit them. And it starts from the moment that you decide who's going to get mentored within an organization and be sent to the field, who's going to be given opportunities to start with small project management positions that are going to allow them to get a bit of understanding and exposure, who's going to be allowed to do research that's going to give them also exposure to the donor. So there's a series of decisions in terms of the human resource development of employees that start with the company. So here I would say that there is an onus on the company to make sure that opportunities for female and male employees are equal. Because if it starts, as it usually is the case, with women, as Nog said before, sometimes being more or considered to be more reliable, more consistent in terms of, for example, working on business development, better at recruitment and staffing of projects. So there's a certain amount of assumptions that are made about women that mean that when it comes to sending a junior person to the field, it can be that the opportunity cost of sending a man versus a woman is very different. Because if the woman is tasked in the home office with doing a lot of the back office work that is essential for our companies running, so mainly, for example, things related to business development, then it means that sending her away is going to mean that that isn't being done by anyone else. So I think that is actually a huge responsibility of our implementing companies, whether they're private or NGOs.
Yeah, and I think the problem is unconsciously we don't necessarily think about it. So then, as a result, a lot of the, as you all know, I think a lot of the back office research, report writing, or recruitment that are the backbone essential of running an efficient project. But that stuff doesn't get written on CV. You're not known to people. So therefore, when young people continue to do that for several years, when it comes to a certain time and age, they actually don't have a lot of things to showcase on their CV that make them more sellable to a client or something. So they are continuously stuck almost in this back office, and perhaps they're very good at it, but they're not really given the opportunity for additional exposure.
Oh, I see. So if you're, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm getting from all of this is to say that, look, first of all, it is indeed, we have some sort of bias, every one of us, right? And when it comes to inclusiveness in economic development or international development, some of this general or cultural bias feeds into the system. And people draft job specs, recruit people based on technical capability without actually thinking how to write those things in a way that be a lot more inclusive of women. And the other thing I'm getting from this is that if the donor are educated, or at least open to being educated, things can be a bit more impactful in terms of inclusiveness with the implementing company and the project that they run. Am I in the right direction?
I think you're absolutely right. But then one thing that not mentioned that is crucial, in my opinion, is the 3 levels of responsibility. It's not just the donor, and it's not just their job. It's also the job of the implementing companies, the contractors, whatever you want to call them. And then ultimately, it's individual people's roles. Like, do you want to be a champion of inclusion or not, basically? And that's a decision that people can also take.
So if you take me as an example, how a man, how do I act, or what sort of experiences have you had that at an individual level that just have this unconscious bias completely apparent? So is it in the manner in which I work, talk, or is it in the manner in which I engage with my female colleagues? What are the things that I, for instance, can begin to think about to recognize that I actually have this unconscious bias myself?
I mean, I think we all have some sort of a bias, as I said, and then it's not going to be, we can't zone into one thing. That's why a cycle of a person kind of, from pre-entry to entry into an organization to staying and progressing in that organization helps, because you could, as an individual, we could all ask ourselves, have we done enough? How far off are we from ensuring that women have seats at the table? you know, have we done enough at the attraction stage? Have we done enough at the recruitment stage? Have we done enough at the learning and development stage? You know, have we done enough at the progression stage? So at each of these stages, we can always ask ourselves, you know, is this everything we have done? You know, what else can we do in a way? So how far off are we from our objective? In a way that's kind of, well, you know, what we can think, but also we think about kind of the organization, or as individual we could adopt to slowly address those issues and then reduce unconscious bias, or we just need to be aware of those things, you know.
I'm muted, but yeah, Al Habib, adding to that, I think off the top of my head, there's 3 things that I would say men can do to make our lives easier. First, don't be patronizing or condescending towards female colleagues, and treat them with the same amount of respect as you would a male colleague, regardless of their level of seniority or of how they're dressed or of how pretty they are. You know, they're just staff. So at the end of the day, they should be treated equally. Secondly, when it comes to staffing projects, whether you're doing it as a freelancer or as part of a company, try to staff women inside the project, and not just because it's a moral obligation, but because it actually makes sense. They may not be the people you're most used to working with, but there are very good professionals out there, and it's not about affirmative action. It's just about making sure that you have a balanced team that will put together a set of complementary skills. And the third one is don't participate in manuals. I think that one would be a very basic one, but if you are invited to participate in any kind of networking event, and you do a basic form of due diligence in trying to find out who else is going to be talking about issues, maybe try to make sure that you promote colleagues, female colleagues, who would be qualified to speak. And if you end up with like an all-female panel, then so be it. You know, like it's just about who's most qualified to speak, and not just a decision based on gender.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a kind of, if we continue as if organizational projects continue to promote this culture of gender equity, then or calling people out for organizing these events, you know, where the presence of women or female colleagues are is less than the dominance of male colleagues. We should, I think people should feel free to call out those people, and that's what Clara said. And the promoting this kind of culture of gender equity is key at all levels. So at the donor level, at the project organization level, or at the individual level. And the other thing we come back to is what Clara said before is the kind of good for business principle, because women practitioners, female practitioners, bring different and innovative solutions and skills to projects and teams and discussions, and they bring certain communication skill, interpersonal skills that will complement the dynamic of the project. So if we think about it that way, it's beneficial to bring these people on. So it's not just about ticking a box in a way. And then the second thing is leadership. You know, like this kind of action or behavior change requires commitment from the top. Essential for successfully achieving this goal. It's not just saying, it's not an afterthought, you know.
So, I mean, so we've spoken at an individual level, at an implementing company level. How about the donors? Because they, well, at least to my own little experience, they set the tone for recruitment, for promotion, for visibility. Um, in some subtle ways that doesn't necessarily mean things that they write in papers. In simple conversation, for instance, they set the tone for the type or the profile of the people that they want to have relationships with. What I've learned in the past is that sometimes you have male colleague or male donor wants to have a male project lead, for instance, because the person finds it a bit more comfortable, or for whatever reasons, to have a male team leader. Um, is there something that we really should point at that the donors themselves can do to begin to at least influence the way implementing companies recruit and staff projects? Clara?
I say that things like this, like the very conversation that we're having, are a step in the right direction. Because as I said at the beginning, I don't believe that a lot of this bias is conscious. So I don't believe that it comes from an evil design to exclude competent women from senior positions. I think it just comes, as you said, from like maybe feeling more comfortable with certain interlocutors, with assumptions as well, actually, that in developing countries, men have it easier than women, which may or may not be unfounded in certain ways in terms of engaging with senior institutions, with different counterparts. So there is a lot that may come into play in these informal preferences for males. But then, and I know it's a tricky one, because at the end of the day, donors are our clients, and we also need to understand what they want and try to give it to them. But everything starts with dialogue and with just creating enough evidence, for example, as the Canopy Lab have done with this study, to try to show the extent of the problem. So I would say that is definitely a step in the right direction, as is this discussion.
Mark?
I agree with Clara. I think Clara is absolutely correct that, you know, the fact that we are, and that you are hosting this and that we are talking about this, we are not going to expect behavior change is not going to happen overnight. So it's going to be, you know, one of the small contribution to then gradually change the way people think. And again, donors are also individuals. They compose of a set of individuals. So the more people are aware that unconscious bias takes place, it is, you know, the better it will be.
Fantastic. I mean, just before I close this, I mean, you guys have been incredibly generous with your time. It's over 30 minutes now. Is there any aspect of this that I may have missed that we have not covered that you think is crucial to mention?
I think the key thing is we just need to, I mean, I think as human beings, we all have flaws, and we ourselves also have unconscious bias, and we just need to know that these things are there, and that we are aware of it. Therefore, we will try to reduce our behavior, our body language, the way we speak, the way we treat people, to make sure that we include more people into our sector, and that applies to me as much as it applies to anybody else.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, I don't want to put labels on this discussion, but if we talk about feminism, which this is part of, feminism is not just the advancement of women, it's also very much linked with other intersectional questions, So the bias that we're discussing now of males versus females also applies in us as females, between whites and other colleagues that we could be championing, right? And the struggles of different women will be very different depending on where they're from and on what their environment is. So for me, that is one issue that is important to keep in mind. And then the other thing is also more proactively, besides obviously our individual leadership that is essential, It's also maybe coming up with solutions for our employers, not the donors, but our companies, and trying to change policies in the sense of ingraining within company policy that, for example, no one attends manuals or no one participates in a manual. And I know for a fact some of my friends are telling me that their companies are already doing that, because it's not only about shouting angrily, it's also about making change happen. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Now, thank you very much. Thank you to both of you, and thank you for sparing the time, and thank you for educating us on this issue. My major takeaway from here is the constant repetition that you did of the fact that all of us have unconscious biases, and it's in really thinking about those biases and how it manifests itself at the individual level, at the company level, and at the donor level, that we may begin to change the way we treat each other within economic development. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the education, and I hope both of you you come back to Dev TV to grace us with your intellectual prowess and especially experiences. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Habib. It was fun.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you.
Thanks, Habib. Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye
Hello,
now.
there you have it. So that's those are two incredible women that have just educated us on exactly what it is that we can do to make international economics and economic development a lot better, and at the donor level, at the implementing company level, and at an individual level. I hope you find this useful. Please leave comments below, whatever your opinion on this matter is, and if you have any other suggestions, please leave them in the comment below. And see you next Sunday. Thank you very much.